when I looked at how Trump picked his cabinet, one of the things that he did is he had everybody do these interviews, and they all had to be graded on how they could speak or appear to the media and things like that. And so you listen to like Lutnick or even Besant. I mean, one, man, I'm sure you appreciate, man, they are the best trolls. Like,
Oh yeah.
man, I mean, even Besant, like you wouldn't see that coming. But you know, when you listen to Lutnick talk, he's able to take these complex subjects and make them very easy to understand. And then back to that Chamath interview, by the way, let's just link to that in the show notes down below so people can go listen to it. I think it's worth a listen. But he talked about tariffs specifically, which I think is an important point, and we'll see what your take is because I know you're a student of history. He talks about, I had Yaron Brook on recently, and I know you know Yaron. He's out there in Puerto Rico with you, and he is like, you know, he runs the Ayn Rand Institute, is as libertarian free markets as they come. He thinks tariffs are the worst idea in the world. But I'm like, but what about when other nations are weaponizing their economies against you and they're subsidizing their goods? And he's like, well, that's on them, and eventually they're going to lose, which is correct theoretically, but maybe you don't last that long. And so Lutnick gave a different story, which I thought was great. And he's like, so look, like, let's just say you have, you know, 2 islands, and one island produces all the goods, and they're subsidizing that. The other island is buying it. So they're sending the money to buy the goods. Well, that nation, or the island that gets the goods, starts reinvesting into the nation that gave them the money. And in a short period of time, they end up owning all the factories, and they own all the land. And now the company that had all the wealth is owned by the nation that was the factory. And that's a very simplistic way to think about it. But when you start digging in, and he lays out a bunch of the data, how Japan and how China, he talked about how the different regions in China all have to compete against each other for like EVs, for example. And because they have so much government stimulus, these regions will compete against each other, and they'll overbuild, and then they can't sell them. And now they're like, well, what are we going to do with them? Well, let's just dump them into another country at a massive loss. Yeah. Right. And then they get the money, then they buy the country, right? And so it's like, when you start to understand that, to the point that you're making, in a Yaron Brook ideological world, like, we should just have open borders and we should just freely trade. But in the world that we are in, you can see how dangerous that could become very quickly. I don't know if you have a different view of that.
Absolutely. And again, you're talking to a guy who doesn't even think countries should exist, right? But they do, and they always are going to. And so we're not going to have this world that Brent Johnson wants. And so once you have a country, one of the main, services that a government is supposed to provide is protection, right? And then it all rolls downhill from
there.
Like
the only thing they're supposed to provide, yes.
Right. And if they can't provide that, are they really a country, or are they a viable government, or are they a legitimate government? And so this is a very simplistic answer, but I think in many ways the hollowing out of the American empire led to the inability to defend the country, or you could make that argument, at least whether it actually got that's where it was headed. And I think that is in the process of being reversed. Now, there's a lot of people who say, we got so far along that path, it's too late. There's nothing we can do. In order to reverse this train, it's going to take 15, 20, 30 years, and it needs to be done in 5. And so my answer to that would be, well, maybe you're right, but maybe you're not. Maybe it won't take 15 years. Maybe it will take 5, but, I think it's very easy to bet against the idea of the United States coming back. But do you really, really, really want to make that bet? And remember, if you're betting against the American economy coming back, you're not just betting against Trump and Lutnick and Besant. You're betting against the truck drivers. You're betting against the farmers. You're betting against the school teachers. And you're betting against the guys sitting in their garages in Silicon Valley who invented the world that we now live in. And I think when you make that bet, it's a little bit harder. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Would you walk into a bar in Oklahoma and tell them that they can't compete?
No.
I'll go with you. I'll go with you, and you can say that. I'll bring a camera, and you let me know how that works out.
Yeah.
And so I listen. I want to be clear. Like, I think we got some really, really challenging years ahead of us, but I don't think that it's impossible, and I think those that automatically think that it's a lose-lose I think they just need to open their minds a little bit to maybe the possibility that maybe some of this just might work.
Yeah. I think after I lived in Puerto Rico, where you're at now, I have the house in Mexico. I spent a lot of time there, built a house, so dealt with that. Spent a lot of time in other parts of the world as well. And you just realize, like, wow, like America is just so different. Like, we were bred on competition. Like, we were just bred on it. And like, I don't understand in Puerto Rico. I'm like, I could just go crush every business here if I just answered the phone. I could just answer the phone. Like in Mexico, if I just showed up at 9 a.m. and like it's just like, but they don't do that. But you have to in America because there's 15 guys behind you that will, right?
Well, and I think, okay, so I think you're touching on something that I think is very underappreciated. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain this in a proper manner or give it the importance that I think it needs, is that I think every culture, every country, there's like a certain ethos that country or that culture has. And I think at the end of the day, for better or for worse, Americans are cowboys. Like we are willing to go into the wild frontier, take all kinds of risks. And when we win, we get all the spoils. And when we lose, we get up and we try again.
Yeah.
And I don't know that other countries have that to the same extent that the United States does. And America loves a challenge, and they love winning, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds very simplistic, but again, is that who you want to fight? On a relative basis, is that who you want to go up against? I think there's something to be said for that. And I think that's what led to the United States being great. Unfortunately, I think the United States has kind of fallen along the way. I don't know that everything will work going forward, but I don't want to bet against them.
So how do you want to bet along with them then?
Yeah. So I am of the opinion, and I've said this for a long time, that I think that where we are headed will end very, very badly. Because I am a free market guy, and to your point, all of the policies that that China had that led to their great growth are now starting to stifle them, right? Because they've built out overcapacity and they borrowed too much money, and the demand is not there, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's where all this involvement from the U.S. government now getting into markets could eventually lead. But I think that could be 10, 15, 20 years down the road. I think what's going to happen in the short term is everything that we've talked about, I think it's going to work better than expected. Doesn't mean there won't be short-term volatility along the way, but I think, again, so long story short, we are betting on, we have most of our investments focused in the United States. The equities that we own are almost all predominantly large cap U.S. equities. The short-term fixed income that we own is U.S. Treasury bills. We own gold because that's the neutral reserve, right? That's what we were talking about earlier. But one of the areas that we're looking to place capital now is in the economic renaissance of America, and specifically of national defense as well as natural resources. Because like it or not, the world is getting divorced. We are going from having one supply chain to two supply chains. And as a result, the supply chains need to get built in the Western Hemisphere. Now, whether that's specifically in the United States, whether it's in Canada, Mexico, El Salvador, or Chile, I don't know. But I think that the Western Hemisphere is going to become more integrated. So we're looking to start to add into our Latin and South America exposure. We only have a very tiny bit right now. But the biggest growth area I see is in this area of national defense and natural resources. And one of the things I spoke about in Vancouver was that I don't think that this isn't a secret, and it's not, it's not classified or anything, but I think the most important government office in the world right now sits in the Pentagon, and it's called the Office of Strategic Capital.
Yep.
And they're run by a guy named Steve Feinberg, who he was the founder and chairman of Cerberus, which, if you want to talk about rough and tumble and hardcore, aggressive market people, Cerberus is about as hardcore as it gets. And this is not a guy that likes to lose money. This is not a guy that hands out money for free. But his job is essentially to coordinate all the resources of the United States government to revitalize industries in both natural resource and technology that are crucial to the United States being self-sufficient and independent from adversarial countries. And those, that they got funding from the big, beautiful bill. And that group is then going to partner with private investors and private investment managers to go fund the companies and these industries and market sectors that need to be developed so that they can accomplish that goal. And, because these industries have traditionally been outsourced to other parts of the world, they're not that big. There's not that many companies in there. But there's an ocean of money that's going to get funded, that's going to fund those areas. And so, when I look at these relatively small industries and I look at the amount of money that's going to get spent to develop them, that tells me valuations are going to rise. And so we are going to be investing in that space. And I think it's the right thing to do, and I think it's a good thing to do, and I think it's going to be a profitable thing to do. Now, there will inevitably be things that go wrong. It will not work perfectly. But when I look around and I see where else do I want to place capital, that makes a lot of sense to me.
So you have this reindustrialization 2.0, sort of like what maybe we saw wartime economy after World War II. There's a massive push, a massive urgency to get some of this, like reindustrialize the base, rebuild the military, these critical minerals, things like that. There's a lot of money that's now been earmarked. And so what you're basically saying is there's a plan, there's urgency, there's a national imperative, and there's a ton of money. And it's all going into just a few certain sectors, and that revolves around these critical minerals, these commodities that are going to be needed, and then companies that are in these certain sectors.
That's exactly
and so
right.
You have a small amount of commodities and companies in that area, and you have a huge national imperative and money supply coming into it. So then supply and demand. That's the big thesis.
Yeah, I mean, as investors, that's what you look for, right? Now, in a perfect world, would I prefer the money wasn't coming from the government? Of course, but that's I play the board in front of me, not the game that I invented in my head.
Yeah, I mean, as investors, that's what we have to do. So
yeah,
I agree with you on that, from a bunch of standpoints, but again, like, I don't like it either. It is the hand that we're dealt. And when I look at, Lutnick breaking down sort of how these other nations do things, in order to stay somewhat relevant, in order to stay competitive, we have to do that. And yeah, maybe it's good or bad. Maybe it's both. It's good and bad at the same time.
Well, to that point, one thing I would say for the people that don't like tariffs and think that we have a horrible tariff policy, I would say we always have a tariff policy. It's just a matter of whether or not we're involved in the negotiations.
Right.
Because every other country in the world does use them against us. And so the idea that we should not use them, but everybody else should, and that's the way a free market works, is just silly.
Yeah.
Right? Again, I think it's really hard to do. I was not good at it initially. I've gotten better at it. I think we've touched on this 2 or 3 times now in this interview, is that you have to be able to separate yourself from what you would prefer to see happen to what's actually going to happen. If you look at the market like a game and you understand the rules of the game, and the goal is to win the game, well, then figure out how to win the game based on the rules of the game, right? You don't have to go invent your own game.
Yeah.
If this is the game that we're playing. Hi, I'm Brent Johnson with Santiago Capital. 4 months ago, we published Empire by Code and made a controversial claim. The US dollar stablecoins aren't just financial innovation. They're weapons of monetary power capable of extending the American hegemony without firing a single shot. The response was pretty intense. Some thought it was thought-provoking, others thought it was too conspiratorial, some thought it was ridiculous. But we continue to stand by the call. And since then, we have continued watching and we have continued researching. Because the empire isn't debating whether or not to expand. It's already expanding, right now, in real time. In Empire by Code, we also showed you why stablecoins matter, how $200 billion in tokenized dollars are already bypassing banks, eroding sovereignty, and making dollar access virtually unstoppable. We made the case that this is America's next great power move and tool to use on the global stage. But we left one question unanswered. Who controls it? Because while the United States will wield stablecoins as a strategic weapon, The battles to determine who gets to wield that weapon and which factions get to deploy it and under what rules are playing out right now. And the battles are brutal. In short, welcome to the stablecoin wars. These are actual conflicts with trillion-dollar stakes being fought on multiple fronts. Private issuers versus banks, regulators in civil war over jurisdiction, big tech plotting a return, nations resisting dollarization while their citizens have already voted with their wallets. The weapon exists, and the empire will use it. But the fight over the factions of who controls it is vicious, and most people have no idea it's even happening at all. So I'll give you a quick look into what's going on. Issuers generate billions in profit, while traditional financial institutions are scrambling to launch competing coins before they become irrelevant. The SEC, CFTC, and Federal Reserve are fighting over jurisdiction, which creates chaos, which will ultimately determine which institutions get blessed and which ones get banned. In the yield battle, issuers earn billions of investing reserves while paying nothing to customers. Who deserves that yield will determine who captures trillions in economic rents. And in the blockchain wars, Ethereum currently dominates stablecoin infrastructure, but Solana and Tron are fighting for the prize, which is to become essentially the settlement layer for the entire digital economy. And in emerging markets, countries like Venezuela, Argentina, Turkey, and Nigeria, citizens are abandoning their local currencies for US dollar stablecoins. Now, some countries will be able to manage this better than others, but others will collapse completely. And we also have stablecoins versus CBDCs. Central banks are building digital currencies to fight back, but markets have already chosen and have definitively chosen dollar stablecoins. Each of these battles shapes who holds power for the next century. This is much bigger than just stablecoins, and it's much bigger than just crypto. This is a battle for control of the base layer of global commerce. And when currency becomes software, whoever controls that infrastructure controls everything. Every transaction, every contract, every financial relationship. The winner writes the rules for how value moves for the next few generations. That's why the banks that ignored crypto are now scrambling. It's why China banned stablecoins while building the digital yuan. It's why these fights are so vicious. Because losing means irrelevance, while winning means power that exceeds Bretton Woods, the Eurodollar system, and the SWIFT network combined. But this time, it's encoded in software and distributed immediately on a global basis. As we said above, the stablecoin wars have already begun. The empire is expanding, but who controls it and holds the reins is still being decided in real time. We've mapped the battlefield, identified the players, analyzed what's at stake. The full paper we're putting out is called Stablecoin Wars, one battle after another. Be sure to read it, because the infrastructure being built today determines who holds power tomorrow. The question is whether or not people will understand what has happened before it's too late. And these battles will very much determine much of your financial future. Thanks for listening.